Just a minute, I'll come here. Okay, so our now this is going. We have 47 people lined up, but we will start. Let me just figure out meeting. Go and okay, gallery view. I'm just checking how to. It used to record, but anyways. Okay, so let us begin. So, hi everyone. Um, So, hi everyone. Welcome to this new episode of Xtra Bytes, and we are exploring light. And before we begin, and let me share that we have one wonderful wildlife photographer, very acclaimed, highly acclaimed, and really successful wildlife photographer Shivang Mehta with us. And I have a special liking for him because I know him from, I think, the days he started, and we know each other from the days we started in photography, wildlife, he in wildlife photography, and we started. I started my journey in photography. So we also have on our panel Shatabdi. So let me first introduce Shatabdi. So Shatabdi has worked very closely with Shivang Mehta, so that's why I thought to decided to bring her here. So she is an independent media professional. So actually, she's been in media from last almost 14 years. So she has done very diverse projects, ranging from even portraits of some tribes and specific tribes of kind of tattoo women. And she has also done in wildlife, she's done a project on the leopards of Bera. And I think her understanding of wildlife is really deep and intense. And she probably is the best panelist who we could have had here. So welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you for agreeing to be a part here.
Thank you, Jassi. Looking forward.
Yeah. And Shivang, so Shivang knows no introduction. So Shivang actually started his journey into wildlife photography in 2005. And it's been an illustrious journey so far. So he was probably, I think, the first one in India to have started the concept of structured photo tours. And that has actually changed the way we travel, photographers travel, particularly in India. And he has actually set a benchmark for everybody else like me also to follow. He's he's won a lot of awards also. And just to cite a very few number, I just noted it down. He's won Siena International Photo Awards in 2018. He's won DJ Memorial Awards in 2014 and 2015. He's also won Sanctuary Asia Award in 2011. And I win photo awards in the wildlife category in 2018 and 2019. And there are many other awards. But I really don't want to hog the limelight. It's not my session. So it is Shivang's session. So I would request Shivang to take us through this journey and show us some extra bites out of his life as a wildlife photographer, which most of us do not know. So we get to see his images, we get to seek inspiration from them, we get to admire them, but there is a lot that goes on behind those images. So these extra bites should help us understand his journey into wildlife photography much better. So without any further ado, Shivang, up to you.
Thank you, Jassi. Thank you for having me here. And hello, guys. So my name is Shivang, as Jassi has introduced me, and I'm looking forward to this webinar with you guys. So today I'll just be sharing my journey as a photographer. And as you guys may be knowing, I'm a wildlife photographer, but I will be just segregating these two words. And, these are two separate words, wildlife and photography. And I strongly believe that when it comes to wildlife photography, my journey as a wildlife photographer can be categorized in two parts, wildlife and photography, because I'm a wildlife guy first and a photographer later. I always believe that. And the reason is that when I started as so just to tell you about my background, before I came into this field of wildlife, I come from a journalism background, and from journalism I moved into corporate communications. So I had no kind of a formal background in either wildlife or photography. So everything I learned was on the field, on the job. And so many years ago, around 15, 16 years ago, this is how my wildlife journey started. I used to work in Corbett National Park. So I used to spend long hours, long days working out here. So many of you who are familiar with the topography and geography of Corbett, so we are all fond of reading about Jim Corbett books. So I was fortunate enough to read those books and learn more from those books, sitting on the banks of these rivers and sipping cups of coffee and tea. So I really used to love that life, walking in these forests and just exploring these terrains. And that used to be, those were the formative years of my life, where I was just exploring these terrains every day of my life. So, these were the views from my room way back in those days. As soon as I used to get up in the morning, I used to get up to views like this. So, when you see things like this, you just get to observe and explore nature from close quarters. And that, that is the, that is the development of a wildlife photographer. That sows the seed of one getting, the connections with nature starts happening at a very young age, and that's how as a young individual, you start taking these first steps in the field of nature and wildlife. So I picked up a basic camera, and the place where I was working, that very rich in bird life. So when it came to birds, that was my first area of interest, and I was really interested in birds because I didn't have much money, and birding didn't cost much. You just needed some very fit pair of legs, good stamina to walk in the forest, and a good pair of eyes to spot them. So, so I, along with my pair of binoculars and with no sense of composition, and just with my basic camera, I used to just walk around in the forest looking for all kind of Himalayan birds. Of course, I had the, I used to walk around with my friends, naturalist, naturalist friends and all, who taught me a lot. So right from these various species of birds. So slowly, even my birding skill sets improved quite a bit. And for a number of years, I was just doing birding. And, you'll be quite surprised that around my workstation where I was working, I used to maintain a logbook at that time. And I nearly documented around 250 odd species of birds, both in the form of images, and some of those images were really very bad, but some of the good images, there were around 150 odd good images. So good and bad, I documented around 250 odd images. So those were the early days, walking around in these boats with a small little camera and with no sense of photography. But and those were good old days because every day I was learning something new. I was learning something new about animal behavior, about nature, and it was all raw. Everything was raw. I was rustic, but life was good. Then came the second stage where in the journey of every nature photographer, there's this inner calling where you suddenly feel that, oh, there's you suddenly have this inner desire that, okay, there's a need to upgrade equipments, because you feel that you're able to capture things, but if there's a small bit of upgrade, you can do it better. So I upgraded a few things, but still all I was doing was I was capturing birds, and I was doing it. I started doing it in a slightly better way. So that's a green magpie, but again, all around my own campus, there was and a few bit of safaris. I used to go in the park as well. I used to go in the park, drive people around. So, moved on to a 100-400 lens, that used to be my staple bread and butter lens that time. I used it for a long period of time. So park safaris, spending a lot of time in the park slowly, and again, working with elephants and tigers and things like that in Corbett. Then came the third stage, where the sizes of the lenses which I was using, the sizes became bigger. As I was maturing with age, the sizes of my equipments were also growing. And once you start spending more time in the field, you start encountering these nice natural history moments, and these elephants just bathing in Corbett as a location. It's a great park. Spend more time in the field, and time and again there will be some great action which you may encounter, and those kind of action moments, if you're equipped with good machines, you may end up creating some nice images. I started traveling outside Corbett to other places in India quite frequently, especially by that time, as Jassi mentioned, we had started this photo-tourism venture around 13 years back, and I'd started going a lot in other parts of the country. And I spend around 300 days of my life, 300 days of the year in the field. So when you have so much of time and luxury to spend on the field, you will encounter some extraordinary natural history moments. So those were the kind of things which I was seeing. And when you are equipped with good equipments, of course you will get to shoot well. But eventually, I was, the more I was spending time in the field, somehow I was not very happy with my own body of work as a photographer, because these were the things which I was thinking. What was I doing as a photographer? What was I chasing? I was just documenting things because I had just become a documentary photographer. I was documenting all these images. I was creating these nice sharp images. Over a period of time, I had accumulated these nice equipments and gears. And thanks to the entire Canon range of technologies, the prime lenses, which were helping me to make these sharp images. And the natural history part, some of those, all those wow National Geographic images which I showed you, those are things which are not in my control because, I can't make those two tigers dance like this. I can't make an elephant dust bath. Those are things which are not in my control. Those animals do those things when they want to. And it's just because I had that luxury of time to spend so much time on the field that, I was able to witness those moments. But what about, just imagine that if I was still working as a corporate professional, and if I just had around 30 to 40 days in a year to spend spend in the field as a photographer. So I need to make those 30 to 40 days count as a wildlife photographer. I can't wait for two tigers to dance like that. I can't wait for some nice natural history moment to happen on the field just to make a nice image. So, those were the questions which had started bothering me a lot, that there's something going wrong. So that was the major question. What was I doing as a photographer? So I eventually started analyzing my own work, that it was not that I was not happy with the last many years which I had spent on the field. I felt that when it came to those last many 6-7 years, my wildlife learning curve had gone up because for the amount of time which I had spent in COVID on the field, learning about animal behavior, learning about species, my wildlife learning curve had actually gone up because I had learned it the hard way. And I was not a kind of a gypsy photographer just going into tiger parks and just photographing only tigers. I was doing on foot jobs. I was doing a lot of foot patrolling. I used to go for things like census surveys and a lot of field activities, which during those times, for me, it was quite productive. I learned various aspects about wildlife. But when it came to photographic learnings, my learning curve was like this, that I was not learning anything new. It was just that my gear was changing after every few years. But, and because of the change in gear, the kind of images which I was producing, there was some difference in the quality of the images, but there was no difference in the standard of the images. There was just a difference in the sharpness of the images, but there was no difference in the standard of the images. So that was a big question mark which was there in my head, that am I, I was still satisfied in my mind that yes, I have taken the right career decision to be there in this field. This is what I want to do, but do I want to be there in this field as a wildlife photographer, or do I want to pursue, do I want to get into the research segment or the hospitality segment? What do I do? Or do I get into, do I become a naturalist? So I decided that no, I I need to stick on to photography because I know the answers. It's just that I need to figure this out myself. So then came the transformation stage. And there were a lot of transformations and the realizations, there were a lot of realizations. So there were these key questions which I had to answer. And if I could take care of these questions, then I knew that this is going to be a really exciting journey. And, this is something which will keep me going as a wildlife photographer. So what is photography? What can pull me out of this boredom? By boredom, I mean, I was not bored of going in the field because I loved going in the field because of the wildlife part, but I was not enjoying the kind of images I was doing. And what will keep me going in the field as a photographer? So till now, I was, from a photography point of view, so there are two elements of photography. One is the science element of photography, where, we as photographers, we normally get too stuck between in the equipment debate, where, we are terribly stuck in the equipment debate, which camera to use, which lens to use. After that, we are always stuck in how to use those gears. And, there's a lot of content available on the internet nowadays on how to use various kind of gears, how to get comfortable with your camera. But there's the other element of photography is something which we don't normally think about that. And that is something which, I started spending a lot of time, and I started thinking about that a lot. And that is something which till now, it keeps me going as a photographer. And that is the desire to create. And till date, this is something which pulls me out of the bed every day and pushes me to go in the field with a camera, the desire to create. Just mind that word, create, because from that word, we come to the very basic essence of photography, which is creativity. So that means that photography is all about creativity, and because photography is all about creativity, then photography becomes a form of art. So that was the transformation part in my life when I started considering photography as a creative form and a form of art. So, what is creativity? Creativity is the art of seeing. A lot of people, when I talk about creativity and I talk, I try to explain them about the art of seeing, then comes the question that what is the art of seeing? So in my opinion, the art of seeing is something, it's like the art of pre-visualizing. So whenever you are in the field and whenever you have that desire to pick up the camera and shoot something. So before you pick up the camera and shoot a particular image, there are certain things which goes on in your own human body, which you never notice. And that particular thing which goes on in the human body, it happens in a fraction of a second. Your eye acts like the lens. You see something, and you see something because your soul has sensed it. So your soul is basically the sensor, and your eye has seen it. Your eye is the lens. Your soul has sensed it, and your brain is processing that image. So that is the art of seeing. So that process has happened even before you have picked up the camera. So there's this mental image which you have made even before that image has been taken inside your camera. So that is the development of that art of seeing, that instinct. That is the creative element of photography which one has to develop. And there are a lot of elements when it comes to the creative part and the art of seeing. There are a lot of elements which you need to inculcate inside you. And, things like the element of light, understanding of light, when it comes to composition and framing, the aesthetics of art. And a thing which works for me a lot, drawing inspirations from other forms of art. There are a lot of things which I see around me, simple things. It can be as simple as if I'm seeing some movie and there are certain things in that movie which I like, as simple as the way that movie has been shot in terms of some frames and composition. So when I'm going in the field and shooting something, though I'm shooting nature and wildlife, so those are aspects which are just sticking to my brain, and I may just try to replicate them. Or those are things which may just come in my mind, and I may just try to apply those thoughts that, oh, I saw something like that in that movie, so let me just try those things out. So, so these are various elements of creativity which I feel, these are all these elements which, when they come together, so these are things which just develop your art of seeing, and it just enhances your development as a photographer. The other question which a lot of people ask me when I again dwell upon this topic of creativity is that what does it take to be creative? Were you as a photographer, were you always creative? Or were you born creative? Or, were you very raw? Or, how does one be creative? I feel everyone is creative. There is an element of creativity in everyone. It's just that you need to brush that up. You need to remove the dust. In case your creativity is dusted, you need to brush that up, remove the dust, and you need to sharpen those skills. You need to sharpen those skills through practice. Once in the field, you start regularly sharpen your brain, sharpen your mind, developing that instinct. By developing that instinct and by working on that aspect of art of seeing, it just happens naturally. I can't explain this question of what does it take to be creative, but it just happens. Trust me that when you are constantly working on the field, it just happens. And you don't need to put a lot of effort. Things will just start coming in your mind automatically, and it will just start happening. So with this new enlightenment and with this new transformation, I'll just show you images again from Corbett, the same place where I spent my initial days. And so I was working again in Corbett, and I felt that there's so much more which can be done in Corbett. If you just start seeing that same forest, but from a very different point of view, when you start understanding the light elements of Corbett, when you start seeing Corbett from Corbett devoid of its colors in black and white. So, when you start seeing Corbett from creative eyes, so that, there are a lot of things which can be done in Corbett. And then after that, it was, there was no stopping. So the other aspect about my photography is technology. After a point of time, I started using technology in my work, and there were two reasons for it. One was, of course, the creative element, because it helped me to create some unique images, unique perspectives. The second part was that with the use of technology, I was able to focus on certain species which are purely nocturnal. And because they are nocturnal, it's very difficult for them, for me to, as a photographer, to go in the daytime and just use my long lenses and photograph them, using my long lenses. So with the use of technology, we can just do some creative things and do some nighttime photography. So there are two aspects when it comes to technology. So one is the use of motorized vehicles and the remote shooting part. So this you see, that this is a motorized vehicle which can be operated using a remote control device, and so I was sitting in the vehicle with this remote control device, and this vehicle can be operated remotely, and there's a wide angle lens being fitted out there, and this this vehicle can be turned around in any direction. There's a tilt and shift feature as well. So how it works is you can create some very unique perspectives of wildlife, like this. So with a 14mm lens, the lion is walking so close to this particular lens that you can shoot, you can create these kind of perspectives. So it just enriches your portfolio, and you can do some very unique kind of images. The second aspect is use of DSLR camera traps, and this is something which I love to do. I enjoy doing this kind of work. So camera trapping is, so you might feel that what is the need of doing DSLR camera trapping? Because there are already a lot of small trail cams which are available, which can be fitted here and there in the forests, and they can give you evidence of nocturnal wildlife moving here and there. So what is the need of putting up such an expensive camera, and what is the need of taking such a risk of putting up this expensive camera? So the need is to create powerful documentation, because if you fit in just a small trail cam, you will get the evidence of a species, but that evidence would just be a record evidence. But nothing can match the image quality of a DSLR. I mean, that's a Canon 5D Mark III out there. That's it's a 23 or whatever megapixel camera, and the image which came out of it was shot at ISO 1000. A leopard walked past that camera 2 days after this camera was set up, and so there's this huge amount of quality difference. So so just the level of the kind of images you produce after putting up a camera trap, there's a huge amount of quality difference. So there's a requirement of producing high quality camera trap images. And I always feel that even I've done work for forest departments and the government. I worked for the Uttar Pradesh government earlier, where we used DSLR camera traps to produce camera trap images for them in Dudhwa National Park. So I strongly believe that other forest departments and other government bodies should use our services. There are other photographers like me who use DSLR camera traps as well. And if we have trained professional people in India who are doing this kind of work, we should definitely, the government bodies should also use this kind of technology to produce high quality documented work of wildlife and nocturnal species. So as you can see, this is it's a camera which is attached to a sensor, and we normally deploy a couple of flashes as well, so that in case there's any kind of a nighttime movement, that sensor detects the nighttime movement, and as soon as there's a movement in the night, the entire unit triggers and the flashes are also triggered, and that's how the image is recorded. So I was just mentioning about the project that we did with the Uttar Pradesh government. So that was a tiger which walked past the camera trap in Dudhwa. So I have a lot of camera trap images which I can showcase, but because of the scarcity of time, we just put up one image out here. So, because as I mentioned in the beginning of this talk, that my earlier background was, I started as a journalist. So I always had this keen interest of telling stories through the medium of my images. And time and again, whenever I did it, I had the opportunity. I always used to come out with images, single images, which used to tell a story. For example, this image which you see was shot in one of the villages in Corbett, where an elephant was trying to enter a village, and the villagers had just lit up a fire to keep the elephant away. So it's just a single image, but this single image is telling a story pertaining to the entire issue of human-animal conflict. So because of desire to tell visual stories, I decided to come up with this idea of connecting various images together, and over a period of time, weave various images together and start coming out with books. So, and books over a period of time, it has started to become a very important part of my, my career, and as well as the way I tell my stories. So when it comes to books, it all started with this particular individual. So, she was one of my biggest inspirations to start writing books, and it all started because of her. So this particular tigress, she's from Bandhavgarh. I mean, she was from Bandhavgarh. She is no more now. She, in fact, in the year 2010 and 11, she used to be a very good-looking tigress. I mean, I still consider she's a good-looking tigress. But she got into a territorial fight with another tigress, in which she lost one of her eye, and but despite of that, she occupied this key territory of Bandhavgarh, and so I started working on her during that time, and for me it was quite interesting that how a tigress with one eye, though she's occupying this dominant area, she has become the dominant tigress of Bandhavgarh. How, with this physical limitation, what is her life going to be? So, with that, I just started working on her, and I spent around 3 to 4 years of my life just following this one particular tigress, year after year. She gave birth to cubs, and those cubs, she raised those cubs for around 14 months, and then those cubs died. Then she vanished for literally 4 or 5 months. I mean, she was barely seen. She was seen off and on, and then she again gave birth to cubs, and then she eventually died. So with so much of documentation, I was quite confident that I'm going to do a book on her, and she's the perfect subject for doing a book. But when she died, I was just left with this huge volume of content, and I didn't know what to do with that content. It's only then when I realized that this is not how a book should be done. It's a book. A book should be. A book is like, it's like a script of a film. You start with a concept, but concepts can change as well, and so eventually my book, which came out later, which was called A Decade with Tigers, so she constitutes one of the chapters, and she her life and the way I documented her life was the entire premise of writing Decade with Tigers, because I thought that the way I was doing with her, what I was doing with her, if I can do with other tigers, that can be the foundation of doing the entire theme of a book. So this is what A Decade with Tigers was all about. I'll just play this for you. It's a small video, which was in fact edited by Shatabdi. I think there's some problem. Okay, so there's some problem out here. So yeah, in fact, that was the premise of this book. Moving on, Africa, in fact, played a very crucial role in my photographic journey, because when I started going to Africa around 10 years back, apart from, I was in awe of Africa. As any young photographer who goes to Africa for the first time, I was totally taken aback with the abundance of wildlife and the ease of seeing various species out there. But slowly I learned that, and a lot of people actually say that we are in the mecca of wildlife when they go to Africa. But slowly since I was working in India as well as in Africa, my realization was that what is this mecca of wildlife we are talking about? You know, in fact, I am staying in the mecca of wildlife. My country is the mecca of wildlife. So why do we call this entire continent as the mecca of wildlife? My country has 16 species of wild cats. I mean, there are 39 species of cats in the world. My country has around 16 of them. The same is true about the bird life. The same is true about the reptiles and amphibians. So from where I understand the fact that, you know, there's you can see wildlife easily out there, but by no way that entire continent can match the kind of wildlife biodiversity or even the kind of habitats we have in our own country. So it's a shame that as an Indian, if I call that particular country as the heaven for wildlife, yes, it is. It's a great continent for viewing wildlife, but you know, I need to develop that respect for my own country when it comes to observing nature and wildlife. So, but there was a basic thing when it came to that particular continent, and when it came to Africa, the kind of respect which the people of Africa show for their own wildlife, that is something which we as Indians, we need to learn that from. And the other learning which I had as a photographer from Africa was that I learned a lot as a photographer from Africa. I learned how to understand light. I learned how to respect light. And there were a lot of other photographic learnings for me, which I started implementing those learnings in India. So, you know, whatever I did in Africa as a photographer, I started doing those things in India. You know, whether it was playing around with slow shutter speeds and motion blurs, I started doing those things in India. So that became the premise for my second book called Chasing Horizons. And this book is actually, you know, it's quite close to my heart because it puts India in a very positive light, though it's a book on Africa, but, you know, for people who read it, they'll definitely know that why it is called Learnings from Africa. So I would definitely suggest for everyone who is reading, everyone who has not bought this book, you should definitely get a copy of this book. And for people who already have a copy of this book, don't just flip around the pages and just see the images. You should definitely read the content, because my books are just not about the images. I put in a lot of effort on the content which is written, because there's no point. So one thing which I forgot to mention about the entire, since we are discussing about the topic of books, there are two types of books. One is, one is a coffee table book, and of course, whatever we are doing, these are also coffee table books. But one type of coffee table book is where you have these flurry of images, and it's more like a marriage album. You know, you're just flipping through pages, and they're random images which are not connecting to each other, right? But when someone is doing these kind of books, and there would be a lot of international photographers or even people in India who would be doing these kind of books where each image is connecting to each other, and there's a narrative which is going along with it. There's a lot of thought, time, effort, and there's a lot of creativity which goes behind creating these kind of books. So my appeal on behalf of those authors as well is to all readers is that, if you are taking the effort to buy these kind of books, you should take the effort to read them as well, because all these authors, they have put in a lot of hard work in creating that content, and they have put in a lot of hard work in writing that content. And it's just not about it's not just about the images that they have made, because if it was just the question of these images, then we could have just made a marriage album and just presented it in front of you. But the content creation which has gone, so there's a particular, there's a message which we want to convey in the form of that content. So it's my request and appeal on behalf of all the authors who do, books the way I do, that you should definitely read the content as well. So this is the third book which we did, and Shatabdi was also part of it. So this book was about the harmonious relationship between the leopards and the shepherds in this remote village called Jawai in Rajasthan. And for centuries, they have been living together. And it was quite an interesting phenomena. And after spending a lot of time in that location, the way these cats have been living in close proximity to humans, and there has been no cases of conflict in that location, that has been quite surprising. And I think both of us had a wonderful time working in that location. So I think the major aspect, the wonderful aspect about this book was, the fact that we did some considerable amount of work in the night when it came to leopards. And that is something which is normally not done in India, working with wildlife in the night. Using spotlights and flashes and stuff. I mean, of course, it was all done in private pieces of land. So, I mean, it's quite challenging also working in the night with predators. So, and knowledge of animal behavior is very important in these cases. So, but there are a lot of camera trap images as well, which we have done. But there's quite a unique body of work which we have done with leopards out here. And for a change, I moved away from wildlife, and since there is a huge culture element in this book as well, so I did some non-wildlife photography as well. So Jassi can comment on some non-wildlife work which are in this book.
This is very wild, non-wildish.
So that's the third book. And Shatabdi has written this third book, and a wonderful narrative which she has written, the way she has connected the culture of Bera with the leopards out there. So I think it's a wonderful blend of wildlife writing with the culture. So that's been my journey so far, and I'm still a student of wildlife. I'm still just a student of art, nature, and photography, and I'm still learning every day. So in case you have any questions, I'm open to any of your questions, and that's my Instagram handle. You can just see my work out there and chat up with me anytime.
Yeah. Thank you, Shivang. That was quite insightful, and I think um, it was very, very interesting because I've been following many wildlife photographers, and over a period of time, I started feeling that most wildlife photographers are trying just to create wildlife portraits. Even though they are not in studio, they are trying to make them look very, very beautiful as if they are shot in studio. Nothing wrong in that. But somewhere down the line, I had started feeling that natural, that um, ferocity that you see when you look at a predator or any other such animal, that starts missing in those images. So,
Yeah.
and I'm not against post processing at all. I am actually in for it. But somewhere down the line, there has to be kept a balance between the two. And your images actually took me to a different level in terms of wildlife, and I really appreciate. And the main thing that I really liked about what you presented today, and I think most will agree here, is that very few show their images from their initial days when they are learning, when they're bad, clicking very bad images, because that is what most beginners need to see, that every uh, brand ambassador for any brand or any established photographer in any field started from where you are starting from. So it's a journey that you have to go through. Nobody is born linguistic. Nobody is born expert in wildlife photography. You still get to hold the camera and get to learn and get to understand the art. And one thing that I take away from this entire thing is desire to create. So I just jotted it down, and I think it starts from that and it ends there. If you understand that part, it's you've understood it all. I think that's what, I hope I'm right, because this is what is the differentiator between just another snap shooter or a camera owner and a photographer who's trying to create something.
Well, what this lockdown has forced me to do is the desire to create new content. Otherwise, I was just doing, refurbishing old talks, and I was just delivering old talks for the past 10, 15 years. So this, I'm just now creating new content now.
Okay. So we will. I'll request all the parties, attendees, to start asking questions in the chat. But in the meanwhile, I would want to go to Shatabdi if she has any question. I certainly have few questions, but I'll first check with Shatabdi if she has certain question and she can ask.
Yeah, Shivang, a couple of things. Like, for example, a lot of times in wildlife photography, what you get depends on what is happening in front of you. Like you said, you can't control it. It's about luck or what natural history moment you are witnessing. So when the maximum amount of your image creation is dependent on something like this, how can someone create their own visual style?
I think a good nature photographer is the way I think about it in today's time is that when I step out of my room every day, is that as you said, natural history moment is not there in our control. How do I make my day productive if I don't see anything? And can I come back to this room satisfied even without even even if I don't see anything? Even if I don't see anything, can I come back to this room satisfied with some good images? So how can I do that? I can only do that if I have developed that kind of a creative instinct of creating some kind of good images.
Correct.
So, if we just rely on natural history moments, then it's very difficult to do that.
Correct.
Even in places like Masai Mara, where, something keeps on happening
True.
here and there. But even in places like Masai Mara, I was just having a discussion a few days back with my good friend Federico, and we were talking about, he works a lot in Masai Mara, and we were talking about this fact that with thousands of hundreds of photographers working in Mara in today's time, it's very difficult to create a good image. The only key differentiator is creativity. So how effectively one can play around with light, even with simple subjects. You can just create a different image. So it's that, as I said in the beginning, you need to develop that instinct, and that development of that instinct, it can just happen with practice.
Yeah, because I think that instinct will kind of, if you see something very simple and just brush past it, but if you have that instinct, then you can create something great even from a very simple situation in front of you.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have one more question.
I actually just posted an image on Instagram just to highlight this topic of instinct a couple of days back. So I just posted a spotted deer image where you can just see a spotted deer through a bark of a tree. So if you read the caption, so the caption says that the jungle has a lot of keyholes, right? So the jungle has a lot of keyholes. It's just up to you as a photographer that how you can observe through those keyholes and show your creativity. And
Correct.
So if you see that image, then you'll understand that as photographers and as visual artists, how we can see the things like just a simple spotted deer from a different point of view.
Yes, correct. I have one more question. So when you were talking about A Decade with Tigers, you mentioned Vijaya's story, and you worked with filming crews and all that. And a lot of times while working with wildlife, things don't go as you plan, especially when you work on long-term projects. Like you mentioned, Vijaya's the litter died, then she also later on passed. So when such things happen, the way you had hoped, how do you keep your emotions in check and constantly think from the head, because you have to finish the project, right? I mean, you can't end the project because something happened to the subject. You have to figure out something else. So how do you separate the two when something like this happens?
Um, I think I have become better at it. Earlier, especially in case of Vijaya, I was emotionally very involved with her, and when the cubs died the first time and the second time, in fact, throughout the duration of that Vijaya chapter, I was quite emotionally involved with the subject. But after that, now I'm quite, I wouldn't say I'm emotionally detached with the subject, but I know how to separate the two things. Because once you become very emotionally involved, then it starts affecting your work also. And you need a fair amount of detachment at times, because at the end of the day, it's a wild animal. It has a separate life, and I'm just there as someone who is documenting that life as a photographer or as a filmmaker. So I can't interfere in that.
True.
So yeah, I wouldn't say that in the beginning I was like that, but with the Vijaya thing, it shook me a bit when she died and all those things. I cried a lot during those times, but that time I decided that no more getting emotionally involved with tigers like this. Just I'll keep on doing my work and just treat them as subjects.
Okay, Jassi, I have a few more questions, but I'll ask it in the course of more conversations.
Before I also ask, there is one interesting question which has come from one attendee, Himadri Boyan. Now he's asking, any experience where your life or the wildlife life was at risk, and lessons from that, if you can share.
My life or the wildlife?
Kind of question. So that's why I picked up his question as well.
My life or the wildlife?
Both. So either where your life or the wildlife. So any such incident which you can remember.
My life has been at risk at during a lot of occasions. So if I start counting that, I think the talk show would be over. So yeah, I mean, in fact, the elephant and fire image which I showed you, that was taken on foot, and it was happening in the outskirts of Corbett, and we were doing a film project that time, and we were just shooting this elephant on the other side of the river, and we didn't know that this elephant is going to quickly cross the river and come on this side. And he started running, so we also ran towards the vehicle. And then I saw these villagers, they started lighting up the fire just to keep the elephant away. So I had my camera gear with me, and they started lighting up the fire, so I went and hid behind the fire. So that's when I took the image, because the elephant started running towards the fire. So yeah, that was quite a risky moment. And so yeah, I mean, especially when you are doing camera trapping, and I mean, it's there is the element of risk, but you see, when you are aware of animal behavior, and when you are aware of your subject, then you reduce the element of risk. And so that is something which I always have in the back of my mind. And when it comes to the risk of the subject causing harm to the subject, that is something which, as wildlife photographers, we always are very particular about, not causing any harm to the subject. So I don't recall any kind of incident like that.
Okay. Nice. Thank you. And I have many questions, but let's say there's one question that comes to my mind, is that you've mentioned initially about being a naturalist as well, and so thought has been going on in your mind. So one question crops in my mind is that is being a naturalist important for being a good wildlife photographer?
Yes.
Or does it complement, or it is separate, and wildlife photography is totally separate?
Yes, definitely. I mean, if you are a naturalist, or if you have a sound interest in research, and see, just being a photographer and get into wildlife photography, it doesn't work too well. But coming from a wildlife background and getting into wildlife photography, that definitely works well, because having a sound background in wildlife and having field knowledge, that is really very important, because this is one form of photography where that sound background in wildlife and having field knowledge about your subjects is really important. So fortunately in India, for young people who want to get into this field, there are a lot of naturalist training programs which happen nowadays, and some of the leading lodges in India, they are employing, they're conducting these programs, and they're also giving employment to naturalists. So so that's a good platform. In fact, if these kind of opportunities were there when I started working, I would have definitely opted for that, because this good formal training for young people, and it's a good way to start.
Great. And the second question that I have is that, see, we know it's very, very difficult to time the sighting of any animal, tiger or any animal. So apart from obviously the camera gear that you are preparing for, what kind of preparation that you do to maximize your chances of sighting and doing photography? Is there something goes in your mind, or some research that goes into it, or anything that you would like to throw some light
Um, well, we since we have a company, and the company works with a lot of guests and all, where we are planning safaris for these guests who are coming to India for photographing tigers and all. So a lot of these safaris are always planned on the basis of where where the tiger movement is happening and where the probabilities of seeing tigers are the highest. So me and my team, we are always in constant touch with various national parks, and it's not that in all national parks tigers are there, but the dynamics of the tiger dynamics in various national parks, it keeps on changing in India in every season. So, and it all depends on the it all depends on factors like presence of breeding females in various locations and things like that. So for instance, this particular season, Ranthambore may be doing better than Bandhavgarh. The other season, say Tadoba, may be doing better than Ranthambore. So it's not that Tadoba will not have any tigers or Ranthambore will not have any tigers. It's just that the dynamics keeps on changing, and the photography potential keeps on keeps on changing season to season. So we, as a photography company, we have to keep that into consideration in order to ensure that people who are putting the money into a particular park, they get the best out of it. So so that is something which I always try to ensure that people should be very careful about.
That's great. Before I get over to you, Shatabdi, there's one question, interesting question by Pratyusha Priyanka. It says, what is your take on human and animal conflict? And because this has been happening now quite often. So your take, and probably what is government doing something to really eradicate it, or in a way somehow minimize it?
Well, conflict in a country like India, it will always continue to happen because we are an overpopulated country, and and the forest cover in our country has reduced quite a bit, and that has pushed wildlife out of forest areas to human dominated populated areas. So that cannot be avoided. And that's the reason why you see leopards straying out from the forest covers to to city areas around Mumbai, even in places near Gurgaon and other all prominent cities in India. So, and conflicts are happening around elephants and a lot of other species. So not much can be done around it. It's just that the only positive side which you can consider is that if there's a fair bit of awareness which can be spread around it, and there are a lot of organizations which are working towards it, where a fair bit of awareness is spread around how these species, especially species like elephants and rhinos and elephants, which are coming out of these forest areas and venturing out in villages, all these awareness campaigns which are going around these species, how the locals can be informed about it. And of course, these programs are happening, and these programs are successful to some extent. But when it comes to just eradicating the conflict, I don't think eradication is possible in today's time, because we have already crossed that line. And I mean, that stage has, we've already crossed that stage of where we can eradicate these problems totally.
All right. Shatabdi, you have something to ask?
Yeah, one last question, Shivang. So you spent a lot of time in Corbett, and initially a lot of your wildlife knowledge and then your photographic knowledge also happened in those jungles. So do you think that, working for such a long period of time in one particular place kind of forced you to break the monotony of the kind of images that you were creating, by because you were in the same place, you were taking the same kind of photos, so because you spent so much time there, do you think it also pushed you to try and think differently so that you can break that monotony?
Yeah, definitely, because once you spend a lot of time in one particular location, then you have a fair bit of understanding of the topography of that place. And I mean, you tend to understand that location from all parameters,
Correct.
from a light perspective, from a geographical perspective, even from, you understand small aspects of that location, even from those small things like trees and which particular tree will receive what kind of light at what time of the day, which part of the river will receive what kind of light at what part of the day. And with those things in mind, when I started work in today's time, in the past few years, I started doing a lot of things in Corbett, which has just diversified my own portfolio. And I feel that so you get to see some of the work in my second book, Chasing Horizons, from Corbett, which I'm also very happy to see Corbett from that perspective.
Correct.
Some images shot in infrared in Corbett, which I never thought about Corbett from that point of view. The entire sal forest of Corbett, which looks so lush and green always, but that sal forest in infrared, and infrared is, it's a totally black and white, devoid of colors, kind of a thing. So elephants in a sal forest in infrared, probably 14, 15 years, 12, 13 years back, I could never imagine those kind of images. So yeah, so every few years, in that same location, you come out with new ideas. I still have a lot of ideas which I want to implement in that same location, and I just want to see how Corbett as a location would look with these fresh ideas. So that always works when you spend time in one particular location. So just trying out some new perspectives in that one location, and then you just compare those images of that one particular location, and you have this widespread of images. So yeah, I mean, probably that's the making of a new book.
Good, yeah. Anything more that you would want to ask, Shatabdi?
No, I think, yeah. Most of the other things which I was writing notes, Shivang already answered in his presentation later on. So
Okay. So there are few questions. There are one or two in the participants also, but I'll come to that little later. There are few things that were there in my mind was that you've traveled extensively, almost across the globe, and you are trying to explore new locations almost every new year that you enter. And my question pertains more to a comparison between African national parks and Indian national parks. What is the major differentiator between the two? You have mentioned that your later part of the photography was really influenced by your work and your experiments in in African national parks. But what is the key differentiator, and would you prefer that? Would you prefer this, or they are two different things?
Well, I would say when it comes to a lot of places in Africa, there's a fair bit of freedom to work out there. There's a lot of scope of experimentation, and that is kind of good. And for instance, there are places in South Africa where you can work in the night. You can do a lot of waterhole shooting using flashes. So that in fact adds to your portfolio of work. There's a lot of unique work which you can do, and you'll see that in my book. We did quite a bit of work in Namibia once, where we worked throughout the night. From 12 o'clock in the night to 6 o'clock in the morning, continuously we were working, shooting a lot of wildlife in the night using flashes. So I gained that knowledge and started using that entire knowledge of night photography and how to use flash and directional light, and replicated that when I came back to India, not only in my camera trapping work, because I was doing that earlier as well, but especially when I started working in my Beda book, I started doing all those things here. So in India, we have those kind of restrictions because of the kind of rules we have out here. So when it comes to Africa, I do at times enjoy that freedom, just from the point of view of learning, because those are things which I don't get to do out here. And so yeah, apart from that, it's more or less, when it comes to wildlife across across various countries in that continent, the kind of species you get, it's more or less the same. You have the same lions and the tigers, lions and the leopards and the cheetahs and all. It's just the forest is the different. The forest is different. Yeah. I mean, if you go to Kenya, in various parts of Kenya, the forest is different. The South African forests are different. So yeah, I mean, it's a nice place to spend time, but I would always prefer spending more time in India as compared to Africa.
Now, my second part of the question extension comes now is that you also mentioned, and I've also experienced, that there's a lot of strictness in Indian parks, but we still see the human behavior and overloaded jeeps surrounding a hapless tiger and trying to, the tiger looks harassed and everybody is trying to be in the front, trying to create images. Now, how do you look at this, and is it not irresponsible tourism also, or maybe even photography tourism as well? Because there are, being from this industry of photo tourism, we know that there are many photo tour operators who are also culprits here.
Well, I think this used to be the case earlier. Now the rules in a lot of Indian parks, they've changed quite a bit, and the vehicles are quite. A lot of our parks have been neatly divided into zone systems, and the vehicles are quite evenly spread in various zones. And most of our prominent national parks, you have various kinds of safaris which are being offered. There are regular safaris, there are full-day safaris, which are premium safaris, which are more expensive. So depending on your budget and whatever you want to do, you can spend that much amount of money and opt for those kind of safaris. So I guess the kind of experience which you are talking about, that used to be there earlier, but I don't see that kind of a crowd accumulating at a tiger sighting in today's time. The crowds have started dispersing, and people have also started becoming more aware. Especially with the advent of social media and with all the campaigns which are being running around, people awareness has also gone up. So in the past few years, the crowds have also started dispersing, and the forest department has played a major role in ensuring that proper policies have been drawn out, and the parks have been neatly divided into proper zone systems, and the vehicles have started dispersing. So I guess the situation will further improve in the coming years.
Yeah, thanks, Shivang. There's one question from Prajit Pillai. Now he says, thank you, Shivang, for a beautiful seminar. Just want to ask, do you think a person like me, who is 40 and has just started photography around 2 years back, has a chance of making it as a professional photographer? See, one answer from my side can be that I started at the age of 40, so I'm sitting in front of you, so I can give you that encouragement. But yes, Shivang.
I think that there's no age barrier, because first of all, there's no word like a professional photographer. You should actually change the word from professional to a passionate photographer. So passion is very important. This word professional, non-professional, it's all immaterial. So you need to be a passionate photographer. If you're passionate, then everything is sorted in your life.
Yeah. See, we are all photographers, so I would always like to come back to the images, and I think that is where photographers thrive, and their heartbeat, everything soars there. So one question that I always ask everybody is that which image is very close to your heart, and which you feel is the best image that you have created, and why? So if you have access to something, if you can show, I know you might not be prepared for it, but just in case.
Okay, let me. Okay. So I just pulled out one image for you. Can you see this image?
Yeah. Oh, this is.
So, all you guys who don't know this species, it's a clouded leopard. So ever since I got into the field of wildlife, I was quite fascinated with this species called the clouded leopard, and I actually never imagined that I will ever get a clouded leopard. And I always felt that if I get to see a clouded leopard, it will always be a passing glimpse, because from whatever I had heard about the clouded leopard, and people who had seen clouded leopards, especially in India, some of my friends had seen clouded leopards. They always mention, oh, we just saw a passing glimpse, just came on the road, and they believed that they saw a clouded leopard. They were not sure that they saw a clouded leopard. And with that thing, I went to Borneo and I started researching about the clouded leopard. I went for a kind of a recce trip, and then with that recce trip, I nailed down a particular location where I thought I can work with this team to find a clouded leopard. I went back again, spent 10 more days, and went again to spend a few more days. And then one fine night at around 12 o'clock, 12:30, yeah, it was 12:05 in the midnight. I had this sighting of a clouded leopard, and again, it was just a passing glimpse. It just crossed the road. And I thought, okay, it's over. And I thought, okay, it's over, it's done. So I went and I just parked the car in the middle of the night, switched on the headlights of the car. We had a cup of coffee, and we thought, tonight is over. Whatever we had to see, as usual, we saw a passing glimpse of a clouded leopard. That's what was meant for us. And while we were coming back from that same road, so the same clouded leopard was sleeping on this log of wood. And, my first glance, so I actually didn't know how big is a clouded leopard, because I'd never seen a clouded leopard before that. So when they showed me there's a clouded leopard sleeping, so me and my friend who was there, we actually thought, is this a clouded leopard? We thought it's a marble cat, because it was looking, small in size. And we had this thing in our mind, it's a clouded leopard should be big. Though, I mean, we had done this extensive reading about the clouded leopard, that it's this big in size, it measures this big in size. And because we had also been deploying camera traps around the park, so we had this mental idea about the size, but we didn't have a visual idea about the size when we would see it in front of us. So when we saw it, we thought, oh, is it a clouded leopard or it's a marble cat? So, our guide was there. He got so irritated, he abused us. He said that you better stop debating and start shooting. You stop identifying the species. You better start shooting right now. So actually, when you're shooting in the night, it becomes a major challenge that when you're shooting and there's a spotlight being fired from the vehicle, and when you're shooting from that same vehicle, there's a major problem of eye shine. And if you're shooting from by standing next to the guy who's firing the spotlight, then the eyes of the animal, they start shining. So then I took the decision that I asked the guys that, can I get down from the vehicle and can I walk into the forest and get down from the vehicle and use this light as a directional light. First of all, in order to avoid the eye shine, and if there is a bit of directional light, it just makes the image much more dramatic. So, and unfortunately, that was the only night where I just decided to, because throughout the day I'd done a lot of field work, trekking in the forest, setting up camera traps, and I'd just gone back to my room, taken a shower, and I was wearing my flip-flops. So I'd just come for that game drive in my flip-flops. So I said, okay, fine. So he said, okay, fine, get down from the vehicle. I said, will this leopard run off? So that guy said, I don't know. It's at your own risk. So I said, okay, fine. Let me get down from the vehicle, because, from here, this guy was sleeping on the log. So I slowly got down from the vehicle. The light was being fired, and those rocks on the forest floor, that gravel was like, they were like thorns, and there were leeches all around, and it was a tough thing because, and I was in my shorts that time, so I just started walking inside the forest. I just took away my flip-flops. I was barefoot, we started walking in the forest. Actually, it was a good thing that I was barefoot because I was not making any noise. Otherwise, with shoes and all, every step you take, you make some noise. The guy was totally unaware. He kept on sleeping. And after around 40 minutes, he woke up. And then he turned around, he yawned. So I didn't believe that the only clouded leopard in my life which I would see would be a 45-minute sighting.
Wow.
And still, when I think about that night, I still can't believe that we had a 45 minutes clouded leopard sighting. So, um, so I know that as photographers we all say that the best image is yet to be taken, but I can definitely say that this was probably one of the best days of my field life when I saw wild clouded leopard. Because I know that this kind of a day will probably never be repeated in my life. So I can't say anything about the image, but
it is fabulous because it shows the way eye contact is there and the way it is really looking ferocious. It's an amazing image.
yeah. So yeah, that's about a wild clouded leopard.
I think two small questions and then we wind up. And one is that we are in a very challenging situation right now.
Yeah.
Pandemic, and we know that you are creating content, and we know that everybody is trying to learn. Everybody who came here attended also, in a way, was spending their time positively and trying to learn something, take home something, and maybe thinking of improving their skill levels the moment things open up and whatnot.
Right.
How do you think that these days are going to impact photo tourism in particular, in general, and wildlife tourism in particular? Are they going to have a long lasting impact which is not going to be good for us, or will things change? What is your thoughts on it?
I think it's a very challenging period for all of us, and um, uh, you know, uh, photo tourism, as we both are in this field of photo tourism, you also know that things have been impacted, and it will take some fair bit of time for things to pick up again. But I'm sure that all our fellow travelers who are people who travel with us, I'm quite sure that they all are willing to travel again, and I'm willing to get out of this jail, I would say. Now it has started to seem like a jail now. I'm willing to get out of this place, and I'm hoping to get back on the field as soon as possible. So, given the opportunity, and as soon as I feel that things are safe for me as well as things are safe for my guests, I'm hopeful that I'll ensure that they are there on the field as soon as possible, and we are going to ensure that they are able to shoot good images. And I think it's just a matter of time. We just need to be patient, and we just need to take it day by day, month by month. I think it's just like a game of test cricket. We just need to play it session by session with proper patience, and we'll just take it with a lot of patience. That's it.
Yeah, and I think the worst part about this entire thing is that unlike weather and forecast and everything, there's no forecast for this COVID-19.
Yeah.
No app which tells you कि अच्छा आज नहीं होगा, आज आप बाहर जा सकते हैं, so आज आपको कोरोना का अटैक नहीं मिलेगा. So there's nothing like that. So that is the, I think, challenging situation that we'll have to go through. And one final question is that and there are many people who are there and who actually ask this also in their own way, that what tip would you give to a budding wildlife photographer? But my question is a little more elaborate than that. Wildlife photography, as I have also come to know initially, in my initial days especially, that the only way to be a wildlife photographer, the first requirement is having a good camera and a long lens. This is one perception that everybody has. So that if you're rich, you buy a huge lens and you buy a good camera which has a good FPS, and you spend money in going to a national park, which is again expensive, which is not cheap by any means, and you click and you become a wildlife photographer. But and we've seen your images where you've not used those telephoto lenses. So any advice would you like to give on how to focus and how to improve as a wildlife photographer and how to establish yourself as a good wildlife photographer?
I think, as I mentioned in my talk as well, lenses, gears, everything is fine. That's a never-ending debate. What to buy. As a photographer, one would always have this inner calling. That you will get to realize that what you will have to buy, when you will have to buy. So just keep on waiting for that inner calling. Don't just spend your money just like that. You'll have that inner calling. Just wait for that calling, and once you feel that, okay, now the time has come to invest, then make that investment. But work on the creative aspect of your photography. Work on developing the creative instinct. Work on developing those instinctive skills. And for that, you need to put in practice. So the more time you spend on the field, any genre of photography, I'm not talking about wildlife, any genre of photography, I think you would also agree, it all boils down to putting practice. And the more practice you put in, the more you develop that instinct. So, and once you develop that instinct, you hone your skills as a photographer. And after that, all those aspects about the equipment, the science of photography, and all those things, they just come later. So that's my advice to all photographers. I mean, young photographers, old photographers, all kinds of photographers. Just put in, those 10,000 hours of practice. That's very important.
Yeah, so true. I think the right word, if you really look into it, is riyaz, because I always say that it's like a music. So any musician or any singer would do riyaz on daily basis. Where is Shivang gone? Shivang, you there? We've lost him. Yeah, just a minute. Can you unmute yourself? You got muted. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm there.
So daily riyaz, pick up the camera and go out and shoot. I think that sums it up. So thank you, Shivang. Thank you for such a wonderful and insightful session. And no words are enough to really thank you for this enlightening evening, I think, especially for me, and I'm sure for everybody around. And yeah, thank you, Shatabdi, for
thank you
really taking out your time and being here.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shatabdi.
Thank you, everyone,
Thank you
for attending. And another promise that I would like to take from you right now is that if we get time again, would you be willing to come on this platform for a different topic altogether? Maybe. Would you be willing to give us that promise? Did you hear me? He's frozen or what?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So great. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe. Keep enjoying. Keep investing your time in some productive sessions like these. These are the things that will keep you motivated and
Definitely.
spirits high.
Definitely, Jassi.
Yeah.
Take care.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.